consideration of ethical practice is fundamental to good fundraising. In fact, sometimes we talk about it in terms of ethical philanthropic fundraising. Because any time that you put people and money together, plus institutions, organizations that need that money, you may have situations that deserve or demand some ethical considerations. First, ethics isn't simply a list of behaviors, a set of restrictions on what we can or cannot do. Ethics isn't something we do because we know people are watching us. In fact, ethics is a reflection of ourselves. Ethical behavior expresses who we are, what values we hold dear, and in the case of the Adventist Church, what values we represent. What principles will we fight for? And so ethics goes straight to the heart of who we are. There's a book about ethical values titled "So That Your Values Live On." And there's an explanation about the ancient Jewish tradition of the ethical will. The ethical will is a document that is similar to the will with which we designate who is going to get our property, to whom are we going to leave some of our material items, our possessions. The ethical will summarizes this disposition, passing on of the stewardship, not just of our possessions, but also of our moral values. So we really think of a will as something, as a tool by which we pass on to others, not just our possessions, but also our set of values. An ethical will is an opportunity by which we can share with our children, the next generation, our colleagues, our church members, the matters that are most important. Those things in which we believe deeply and also which have a biblical undergirding. Writing an ethical will is an opportunity for us to examine how our lives have had an impact on others and will have an impact on others. I would like to have you take a few minutes to reflect on these questions and develop your own statement of values that you hope to pass on to others. What you write is going to be a very personal document and only will be shared if you so choose. Perhaps a title that we could put onto this activity and also this section is one that Independent Sector, a major Washington, D.C. organization, coined some years ago: obedience to the unenforceable. Obedience to those values that are important to our church and to you as a leader in that church. So please take a few minutes to reflect on the questions that I will read and you will also have in your materials, and develop your statement of values of what you hope to pass on to others. But not just that. This will be an undergirding of the values that you will represent when ethical decisions need to be made, particularly when we are dealing with donors, with generosity, and with what sometimes donors request that we do. So this is a commitment to yourself, but also one that you will maybe want to share with someone as you discuss these particular ethical issues. The objective is to identify the values that will govern your ethical behavior, because it isn't always a matter of one answer fits all. Sometimes there are various considerations, there are various aspects that impinge on what we are going to do. So some of these questions might help you get started. What are the values that have been most influential in your personal and professional life? Who has modeled these values? Why did you admire these values? How do you want to be remembered? What is a legacy that you wish to leave? What values of yours do you think will be especially useful for the next generation? In other words, the legacy that you will be leaving, but also leaving a roadmap for others. What aspects of the way that you live your personal and professional life would you want your children, grandchildren, colleagues, church members to continue? First, there is a commitment beyond self. This is sometimes that we take for granted when we are talking about church membership and leadership. But thinking about more than just ourselves, a commitment to others. Some people may say that's certainly endemic to the pastoral scene, but it also extends to some of the behaviors we model for our church members, for our constituents, for our families. Then there's a commitment beyond the law. There may be aspects or decisions that we have to make that are within the framework of a law, but we may want to think on a more broader basis, how does this decision affect others as well as our organizations? Certainly a commitment to the public good. How does this affect others? The various groups whom we influence, such as community members, such as colleagues in other walks of life. Going on with some of these ethical values, there's also the respect and the value and the dignity of individuals that we wish to model. And when we think about that diversity that we will find in a church and community setting, that dignity, that respect for others is another of the basic ethical values. Certainly tolerance, social justice are important when we make ethical decisions, and accountability, which is certainly one of the most serious considerations today when we consider fundraising, goes along with openness and honesty, and of course, following the laws. These were values that were put forth by Independent Sector, a leading organization and association of leading nonprofits in Washington, D.C. Now, another organization, the Josephson Institute of Ethics, has put forth 10 major ethical values. And just to review these quickly as a reminder to ourselves. First is honesty. Second, concern for others. Integrity. Respect for others. Keeping our promises. Law-abidingness. Civic duty. Loyalty to our organizations. The pursuit of excellence. Fairness, and again this word that is very common in the fundraising world today, accountability. People want to know what is it that we are accomplishing. So as we look at a practical tool for making ethical decisions, let's think of a continuum. On one end of the continuum, we might have situations that are clearly ethical or unethical. If we were to draw a line, we might have another continuum where things are clearly legal or illegal. So there's a continuum here, and somewhere in the middle, we may have situations that we may call a gray area, where we need to apply some of these principles carefully in order to come up with the right decision. But continuing with this model, we may go down to another point where some decisions are practical or impractical. And it is this kind of a model that a professor of philosophy in the University of Miami has put out a model by which we can consider some of these ethical decision makings. If you will think with me, a circle, a half circle. In the very top of it, we might write in this half circle the word mission. When we need to make difficult ethical decisions, one of the first things to remember is how does this measure up to the mission of our organization? In the case of the Adventist Church, we think about the broad mission and then the particular mission of our organization. Then let's go to the second half of the circle down here. This is where we might divide the circle into pieces, where one says, how does this ethical decision affect our image? Another might say, how do our members feel about this decision? We might also think about our image in the community. If we make this ethical decision, suppose a donor wants us to do something particular, and it's not really against the law, might not be very practical, but we have to say, is this an ethical decision that we're going to make? And we're going to give you some materials and examples by which you can apply this theory a little bit more thoroughly. So basically, the second half of the circle is whom does this decision affect and how? Finally, if you look at the middle, that's where you belong. What can you live with? Another aspect of this model is to look at options. Perhaps walk your way through this model, and we will give you this in the materials that you will receive with this course. You will probably want to think of several options going through the steps of the model, and that will be one more ethics check. Some of the questions you want to ask yourself, if you think back on the continuum that I just explained to you, first of all, is it legal? Sometimes we need to get up to speed with some of the legalities, especially involving donors, donations, such as planned gifts and other major gifts. We need to think about the legalities. Second, is it balanced? Is it fair to all of those who are concerned with what the impact of this decision will be? And then third, going back to the ethical will, how will it make me feel about myself? Will I feel good about this decision? As I look at it, as I think about it, what is my own reaction to it? As we apply these concepts, I think one of the important things to remember is that there are no hard and fast rules. We need to think about the biblical injunctions that we have, also remembering that some of the biblical experiences were a result of their times, so we need to look at what are the guidelines the Bible gives us. As we also apply ethical decision-making, we think about our boards. What are board responsibilities? One of them, of course, is to have policies for making these kinds of difficult decisions. And sometimes those decisions really are difficult, as donors wish, often with good intent, to have us do something with the funds that they are going to share. Donor expectations, donor influence, donor demands, and we need to be ready with what is our set of values and beliefs that we translate into policies. Sometimes we have to consider ethics when it comes to the whistleblower phenomenon. To whom do we talk about this? Who should know about this? And of course, a consideration that there are some universally applicable principles that we want to bring to our own organizations and know how they work in our particular setting. Fundraising is such a practice that has a wide influence for good. In this practice, at times we have decisions that we have to make that are not easy ones, and one size doesn't always fit all. I hope that the tools that we have shared in this particular session, as well as the materials that you will have in your curriculum packet, will help you in developing your own moral will or ethical will as we started this section, and with some of the principles that you can apply to your own setting.